Today on No Greater Love with Pastor Jeff Kramer.
And Isaac is living in this place at this moment, right there before the well of the one who sees, the well of the one who takes care of him. In other words, he's living in the middle of the promise of being cared for by God. And I ask you the same question. You know, the safest place that you and I can be is right square in the middle of God's plan and in the middle of God's calling, in the middle of God's purpose. And many times we find the disruptions within our life is because we're not in the middle of those plans.
Through innocent blood, he showed his love, taking the cross for us. No greater love than innocent blood.
Welcome to No Greater Love with Pastor Jeff Kramer. Today, Pastor Jeff continues in the book of Genesis and the ongoing narrative of the lives of key characters like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. As we explore the twists and turns of their stories, we're confronted with an important question. How did the choices we make in moments of temptation affect our future? Esau's decision to trade his birthright for a momentary desire serves as a powerful reminder that sometimes the consequences of our actions can be long-lasting. It's a lesson we can apply to our own lives as we navigate our Christian experience. And now, here's Pastor Jeff and a message titled, The Family Story Continues.
Let's take a look on the screen for just a second. Romans chapter 11. It says, many of the people of Israel are now enemies of the good news, and this benefits you Gentiles. Yet, they are still the people that he loves because he chose their ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now watch this next verse. It says, for God's gifts and his call can never be withdrawn. So Paul is mentioning that in the New Testament, right on the back door of the reference of speaking about the patriarchs, of speaking about Israel as a nation people, if you will. And even though that they've had all of these things in which they have wrestled with over the course of time, what Paul is magnifying here for the church in the New Testament from the book of Romans is that he's saying, listen, man, God's not going to give up on you either. And I don't think that message, and I don't think that the drum around that message, I don't think that we can pound that enough because, man, how quickly do we fall underneath the condemnation of Satan so fast? So fast he's able to condemn us. And so what is the point? The point is very simple, that I can depend upon God's unchanging character. Now, the story advances ahead. Again, we're back in Genesis 25, picking up in verse number 5. It says that Abraham, that he gave all that he had to Isaac. But Abraham gave gifts, notice the distinction, to the sons of the concubines which Abraham had. And while he was still living, he sent them eastward away from Isaac, his son, to the country of the east. And so if you can get the picture of this, if you can understand what's going on, up in verse number 1, we see Keturah is referenced as a wife. And then in verse number 2, you see these 6 other sons that are born. We get down here in this area, you know, and Abraham knows he's coming down to his death time, you know, and everything that he had, he's going to entrust to Isaac. He's going to pass it off to Isaac. But verse 6, what did he do with all of these other sons? Well, he gave them gifts. He didn't give them the inheritance. He knew that everything was to be given to Isaac, that the promise was in Isaac, that Isaac himself was a promise, but that the line of promise would continue on to work through Isaac. And all these other sons, while he gave them gifts, it was so skillful of what he did because he knew the propensity of these guys rising up to try to take out the chosen son, Isaac, literally, you know, to disrupt his life and or to take his life was there. And so Abraham says, man, I'm going to give them gifts. I'm going to bless them and I'm going to send them far away. And he sends them to the east to get them out of Dodge. But Isaac stays in Canaan. Isaac stays in the promised land. And so, that's where the inheritance traveled down to. And I want to read to you Genesis 17, verse 7 to 8. Again, we've already read it, but I just want you to understand in the flow that we're just building and documenting as the flow of the family keeps going. Here's what it says, Genesis 17, verse number 7 and 8. Remember what God said. He says, I will establish my covenant between me and you and your descendants. Who is Isaac? He's a descendant of Abraham. And he says, your descendants after you, their generations, for an everlasting covenant to be God to you and your descendants after you. Also, I will give you and your descendants after you the land in which you are a stranger, all the land of Canaan as an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. So without getting into all of the details there, please just understand that the line was identified, the promise was given, it moved from Abraham, it moved down to Isaac, and now Abraham's at the end of his life, and the fulfillment and the funneling of what God is doing, first through Abraham and then picking up within Isaac. Everything is coming down to Isaac. Isaac is picking up on those promises, picking up on that number one spot there, if you will, and he's staying in the promised land. It's not Ishmael. Again, it came from Hagar, the work of the flesh. Nope, that's not the one that God identified. It's not the 6 sons of Keturah. Nope, those are not the ones that God identified. The promised child, the one that is gifted, called, anointed, and that God is going to work through, it's Isaac. It's a very specific line. And so, as he works his way through this, well, we come on down now, and we see in verse number 7, it says that this is the sum of the years of Abraham's life, which he lived. How old did he live to be? 175. Was he young or old? 175 years old, man. That dude, he wore out his sandals, I guess. I don't know. That's straight up old, man. Anybody here that age? Anybody here feel that age? I don't think so. It says, and then Abraham breathed his last, and he died in a good old age, in case we wanted to know. It was a good old age. You know, the idea is that he had a full life. The idea that in the fullness of that life is that, you know, he experienced the blessings of God. And I think that's something important for us to remember. You know, that we want to die a good old age. In other words, having lived a life well after God. That's the whole picture there. Yeah, he went to 175 years. I got no intention to go to 175 years. You know, if I make 75 years, well, that might be a plus, maybe. I don't know. I'm cranky enough now. I'm getting to 75. I might be a wee bit more cranky. We've had some good times, and maybe, you know, whatever the time comes that God brings. But I do want this. And that is I want to be a good old age. And again, one more time, just recognizing the goodness of God, that he lived in such a way that he enjoyed the goodness of God, and he came to this age. It says, and he was an old man full of years and was gathered to his people. And so the time has come for him. And, you know, when this takes place and he dies, we've got Isaac and Ishmael. They bury him. Look ahead to verse number 8, 9. It says, and his sons, plural, Isaac and Ishmael. He's only recognizing 2 of them there. Buried him in the cave of Machpelah, which is before Mamre, in the field of Ephron, the son of Zorah the Hittite. Now, why do I share all that with you, all those names? What does it mean? Where did he get buried? What's the name of the city he got buried in? You guys remember? Hebron, absolutely, that's it. So we got all those descriptive things there, but he's buried in Hebron, that's it. And you know, again, I told you that when we go into the West Bank, you can go to the Tomb of the Patriarchs today, right here to this location. You know, the cave is not there because they put a shrine over the top of it, but you can go right to this location and you know, and see these tombs and everything there. So very fascinating there. And so as the story moves forward, you know, he's buried next to Sarah. Verse 10, it says, the field which Abraham had purchased from the sons of Heth, there Abraham was buried, and Sarah, his wife. So Sarah retains that position, that place of honor. He loved her, he cared for her, and regardless of what happened with Hagar and Keturah, his heart was here with Sarah, and that's where he was buried. And then it came to pass after the death of Abraham, and I want you to clue in on verse number 11, because it gives us a micro detail of what lies ahead. One more time. It says that it came to pass after the death of Abraham that God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac dwelt at Beer Lahai Roi, or Roy, I guess is how you would say it. And so what do we know about that particular location? Well, I've got a note here within my Bible, and I want to find it and read it to you here. If I can find it fast enough, I'll read it to you here. If not, we might go without it. Beer Lahai Roy. Okay, so literally the well of him who lives and sees, or the well of the one who takes care of me. So as this is moving down, that Isaac is, the work that God is doing is not being filtered through Abraham now. It's exclusively on Isaac. And Isaac is living in this place at this moment, right there before the well of the one who sees, the well of the one who takes care of him. In other words, he's living in the middle of the promise of being cared for by God. And I ask you the same question. The safest place that you and I can be is right square in the middle of God's plan and in the middle of God's calling, in the middle of God's purpose. And many times we find the disruptions within our life is because we're not in the middle of those plans. And I can literally just kind of glance the room like this so nobody gets tipped off of who I'm looking at. But I can see that there are people, many people within this room, that God's got a good plan for your life. But you're really kind of more dragging your feet because you're not understanding the way that God works. Because you haven't recognized and you haven't been able to take those steps of faith to embrace the call upon your life so that you can continue to move forward. And we find through the pages of the scripture that many well-intentioned men and women, followers of God, that men, they can vacillate one direction or the other direction, and their life becomes one perpetual struggle for existence. And that's often a sign that you're just outside of the will of God, and within your heart of heart. You know that within your heart of heart, that God has a call upon your life, and you just haven't responded to that call. And you're trying to do every other thing underneath the sun to put and to establish a good life, and to do this and to do that, and get everything set up rather than taking what Jesus has said. Jesus said, "Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness." And what would happen next? Anybody remember? All else will be added to you. Everything else will be taken care of. Isn't it amazing that when we're walking with the Lord and I'm in step with what God is up to within my personal life, how he causes things to come together, and then when he tries me, then when he tests me, then when he allows me even to be sifted by Satan when those times come, that I pass those tests in a different way because I'm insulated in the hand of God. Because nothing comes to me apart from his perfect will, right? We've got that example in Job. Extreme example. Please don't use that example for your life. And just realize that that's a radical example. But in a general capacity, the details of your life and my life, when I'm in the will of God and I'm walking in lockstep with what God has for me and what he's created me for, that my life becomes so much more easier. I'm not saying that there's not pressure. I'm not saying that there's not responsibility. What I'm saying is that I'm not wrestling with my Creator. And that is where much of the frustration within our life can come from. I think I had shared this. Let me think. It was last night. I was teaching the School of Ministry last night. And I shared this with these guys. I said, 3 years into being a Christian, I felt like God was tapping on my heart to go out and to become part of a church plant in Ohio. And just don't go to Ohio, by the way. That's not the place to go. It's not cool. But I could sense that so early on in my Christian walk. And there are parts of me that wonder from time to time, man, what if I wouldn't have backed up? Because I paused before the Lord there, and I took a deeper path within law enforcement there. I'm just barely 22, 23 years old, whatever. I'm so young, and I took a different path. I'm going, okay, I got to do these things. And at that time, it's like, well, we want to buy a condo, and we want to do all of these particular things. And I tell you, as I look back now, I can see that the striving within what I was doing for work, that God was still with me. God still gave me success, if you will. But it was this labored effort that I was walking through, and I could sense that it was like, well, man, I'm just not dialed into where God wants me to be, and I just deadened it more by working more, by trying to achieve more, by trying to accomplish more, and all those things. And I could never get ahead. Never. And I share my own pains and stuff. Not to whip you guys like donkeys, but hopefully to prompt you and to allow you to maybe learn through some of the pitfalls that I have experienced along the way. And we know that everything comes back to the faithfulness of God. For God does want to lead us. He wants to lay out those steps within our life. And God's plan was unfolding right here with Isaac. And it was narrowing down. And he was at this, he's in this location here. Verse 11 at the end of it, Ber Lahai Roy. He's right here, right before the one who cares for him. Literally, he's at the well of the one who cares for him, the well of the one who sees. And God's favor was there. We're going to see next week in chapter 26 that he bolts from this place. And he did the same exact thing that his dad Abraham did. His dad Abraham did it a couple times. He departed out of that central core area of the will of God. And he ends up getting rebuked just like his dad did by an unbeliever. It's very crazy to see how these things pass down within families, that our kids can, we teach our kids, we tell our kids and all of these things. And what do our kids pick up on? The stuff that we do. And that's not really what we tell them, right? Some of that stuff gets in there. But man, because they're watching, they learn vicariously by just, watching what mom and dad does. And that's what they end up doing. They end up doing that type of stuff. And this is no different in this case right here. That Isaac had picked up on some of those things. And again, we'll unfold that a little bit more next week. But for the sake of time in here tonight, let's advance the story. Come on down to verse number, maybe I should give it to you here in 12. Let's go down to verse 12. So 12 through 18, what do we see here? Well, we got the death of Abraham that's already happened. Now we're moving into this area where we see a brief genealogy of Ishmael. But Ishmael's going off the scene, okay? It's just giving us a little blip. The story thread is not tracking Ishmael. He's not the central character here, okay? But he is referenced here. And so verse 12 down through 18 or so, we've got the death of Ishmael and kind of his impact and those that came from him and all of that. And then we move beyond this. We get into verse number 19 rather. And now, again, we're fully funneling our attention to Isaac. It says that this is the genealogy of Isaac, Abraham's son. Now, Abraham begot Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah as wife, the daughter of Bethuel, the Syrian of Padan Aram, the sister of Laban, the Syrian. So 40 years old is when he gets married, okay? And so what happened there? Well, he took her as wife at 40 years old, but verse 21, it says, Now Isaac pleaded with the Lord for his wife because she was barren. And the Lord granted his plea, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. What we don't see here within this, or right within those verses, is that we don't see the expanse of time. So use your eyes, go all the way down to the end of verse number 26. And here's what we recognize. We recognize that there's a 20-year gap in that process. He took her at 40 years old. They tried to get pregnant and have children. She was barren. And notice the end of verse number 26, that Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them, when she bore Esau and Jacob, or Esau and Jacob, however you want to pronounce his name. So there was a 20-year process in there of them waiting on God. Of them waiting to, Isaac knows that he's the man. He knows that it's coming from his dad and passing down to him, and he knows that will continue on. He knows. But living in that, look at how long it took for God to answer that prayer. And then all of a sudden she gets pregnant, right? She's got these twins within her. Look at verse 22. It says, but the children, they struggled together within her. And she said, well, if all is well, why am I like this? And so she went to inquire of the Lord. Very wise woman right there. And the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb. 2 people shall be separated from your body. One people shall serve the stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. And so what I love about this is that we see that they stayed consistent. They didn't try to augment of bringing forth children to continue the promise. Who tried to augment things? Abraham, right? His dad tried to jump in. And so, I'd love to say this. Jody and I, we go back to the days in our high school sitting on the grass in the quad of the high school that we attended. We attended Bonavista High School in Spring Valley, California. This is in San Diego, one of the little cities in San Diego. And we would sit out there on the quad. We'd sit out there on the grass areas and all this stuff. And just very young, 14 and 15 years old, man. I don't even know why we were having these conversations as kids. But we say, hey, if we ever got married, we're never going to divorce. That's not going to be part of our vocabulary. I mean, we're saying these things as kids. And we literally would, I just think it was just the slickness of me as a little kid. I'm talking about picket fences and all this stuff, pulling your ponytails and whatever. It was just that time, man. Here's the point. I don't think I made the point. Is that we were not going to follow the processes of our parents. Her parents, my parents, all, both sides, multiple marriages. We were all over the road with different things. And, God does something special. Before I attended, I call it your high school, because really you were the stabilizing force at that time as a kid. Man, I had gone to 14 schools prior to meeting her. And when I met Jody, it was school 15, which I attended for sophomore, junior, and senior high. It was my longest place that I ever stayed at a school. I was a wreck. And so our conversations were about not following down those painful pitfalls in which we saw our parents do. Back to our story, that even though it was 20 years that she was in a place of being barren, Isaac did not resort to following some of the bad practices that he saw that his dad do, leaning away from the promise and trying to get it done himself. So that's a huge plus. But we can also notice this, is that while the promise was coming, it was there, it happened, she ends up conceiving here. And then what takes place on the inside of her, she's freaking out. Verse 22, it says, but the children struggled. This literally means, in Hebrew, it means to crush or to oppress. And so she knew, as a pregnant mom there, she knew, whatever's happening inside of my tummy, this is not right. And so she's inquiring of God for God to give her some insight in all this. And right here in the middle of walking out promises, as God would do that, as God would work, God gives her this thing, and he says, listen, there's two nations inside of you. There's a war that is going on inside of your belly, and it's going to continue when those kids get out and move forward. And so what do we have? What are the nations that we have here? Well, we have Esau. Okay, so he is an Edom. He's the father of Edom, or an Edomite, if you will. His name means hairy, and the work that he ends up doing, he gives up his birthright for a thing of stew, a red stew. And so there's a play on that. He's an Edomite. Whereas Jacob on the other side, the other nation, two nations here, he's an Israelite, right? He is the one that would be governed by God. He moves from this place of being a manipulative guy, a soft guy, but a manipulative guy, to having his name changed to Israel, which means governed by God. And so those are the two nations that are added inside of her belly there. And so I'd love to say this. I'd love to tell you that, that right here in the middle of this plan, that the New Testament speaks to us in these areas. So let's see if we can take a look at the screen here together. Romans chapter 9, I think this is on the screen, verse 10 down through 13. Let's see if we can cue that baby up here. Here's what it says. It says, and not only this, but when Rebekah also had conceived by one man, even by our father Isaac, that's our story. It says, for the children not yet being born, nor having done any good or evil. Stop right there and pay attention to what we're working through. That God has made a selection while those two kids are in the womb. Those kids are still in the belly right there, Esau and Jacob. And in the New Testament, in the book of Romans, Paul is magnifying something that impacts you and I right in this room right now. He says, one more time, for the children not yet being born, they hadn't done anything good or evil, that the purpose of God, according to election, might stand, not of works, but of him who calls. It's God's selection. It was said to her, the older shall serve the younger. So God was calling out right there, before the kids even popped out of the womb, that what he was going to do.
That's all for today. Join us for our next broadcast of No Greater Love with Pastor Jeff Kramer, weekdays at 10:30 a.m. No Greater Love is an outreach ministry of Westminster Calvary and is supported by listeners like you. If you would like to partner with us, please text GIVE to 720-354-6485. Your donation of any amount helps keep No Greater Love on the air, ministering to thousands across the Front Range. We would like to personally invite you to join us for our weekly worship services, Sundays at 8 or 10 a.m. and Wednesdays at 6:30 p.m. We are located in Westminster, Colorado, on the northeast corner of Church Ranch and Wadsworth Parkway, near the Fossa Fitness. If you're not local, tune into the weekly live stream on our web campus, app, Roku, or on Apple TV. Have you downloaded the free Westminster Calvary app yet? You can stay up to date on upcoming events, join a small group, request prayer, and watch live worship services. Just search Westminster Calvary on your favorite app store today. Lastly, we're a church that's ready to serve you. If we can do so, give us a call at 303-223-4640. And remember, there's no greater love than when Jesus gave up his life for you and me. Thanks, and God bless.